advertising contributed to a number of profound, large-scale social changes in the U.S. that really changed us fundamentally as a society. One way in which advertising had this kind of all-encompassing effect was in how it encouraged a transition in our society from a producer-directed society to one that was more oriented around consumer products, right? Prior to the 20th century, in the 1800s, Americans defined themselves primarily in terms of work, their job, all right, making a living, sustaining themselves and their family. Now, we've always had jobs in American society, but historically, at that point in the 1800s, earlier on, that identity about work and our role as producers really defined us. Advertising led to a shift away from that conception of ourselves just as workers, as people involved in producing products. Instead, advertising encouraged people to think of themselves more as consumers and to shift one's attention away from, one's life at work, right, and the drudgery of work, and instead advertising encouraged people to focus on the more pleasurable activity of consumption, all right, consuming products, all right? So advertisers told people, don't think about your dreary, job that drains all the life out of you. Think about these really cool, wonderful consumer products that are going to enhance the quality of your life, right? So it led to this kind of reorientation of people's sense of who they are around the consumer products that they purchased. Now, some critical scholars argue that this also had a political effect, that as advertising encouraged a shift from one's role as a producer to a consumer, it encouraged factory workers, all right, to not be as preoccupied with concerns about work. And this had a political dimension because factory life was pretty brutal earlier on, right? People worked long hours in factories, doing monotonous jobs, getting paid very little and often working in atrocious conditions. And that this kind of treatment on the job encouraged workers to unionize and to challenge their treatment on the job by these exploitative companies and owners, right? Well, advertising, again, took the edge off that discontent, all right, by encouraging workers to just focus more on their home life, focus more on their leisure time, and to be less preoccupied with the harsh conditions at work, and, frankly, also being less concerned about how to challenge those exploitative conditions, right? Now, another impact of advertising more broadly was the role it played in terms of shifting people's views about technology and consumer products based on this kind of technology. Advertising throughout the 1900s called attention to all of these snazzy new consumer products based on newer technologies that would make one's life much easier, right, and much more pleasurable. And this was particularly the case for products oriented towards the housewife or homemaker, right? Advertising focused on how products like a dishwasher, right, or a washer or dryer could make the duties of the traditional housewife of that time much easier to complete, right? So again, it really socialized people to embrace all of these newer technologies. And I guess I would go a step further and argue that advertising conveyed certain broader ideas about technology that I think continue to this day. The idea that we can rely on technology to solve our problems, all right? That whatever issue we face, in terms of problems with our relationships or, anxiety or problems on the job or whatever, we can rely on consumer products embracing the latest technology to solve our problems. So I think the advertising, apart from advertising particular products, encourages this broader socialization for Americans to be receptive to embracing new technologies. As a result of some early abuses by advertisers and a lot of public controversy around advertising of some of these quack patent medicines, the government and the advertising business itself set up some systems of regulation to monitor the practices of the advertising business and curb some of these more outrageous kinds of abuse that had taken place in advertising. And there were two different groups of organizations involved in regulating advertising as a business. Some organizations were self-regulation by advertisers themselves. So, for instance, you had the development of the Trade Association for Advertising, the American Association of Advertising Agencies, that set up some guidelines for ethical, responsible advertising. And you also had the establishment of the Better Business Bureau that business set up as a way to provide consumers with a way to complain about shady or unethical practices by particular advertisers or businesses more generally. The U.S. government also played a role in regulating the practices of advertisers, and the main government agency that took on that role was the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, that took some actions regarding deceptive or unethical advertising. Now, I guess I would just supplement what your book says with a note of caution about these regulatory agencies and organizations. I think it's important to ask certain questions about just how effective or powerful these organizations have been in regulating the practices of advertising and just how successful they have been in terms of encouraging advertising and advertisers to be responsible and ethical. For instance, when we're talking about the AAAA or the BBB, that those organizations rely on compliance by the advertisers and the businesses themselves. Right? There's nothing that requires businesses to abide by the rules or guidelines of the Association of Advertising Agencies or the Better Business Bureau. There's simply voluntary compliance by companies to the guidelines that these organizations set out. And I guess a real question is how active or engaged are these organizations in monitoring abuses and encouraging advertisers to engage in ethical practices. And now some critics, a little bit more cynical critics, argue that organizations like the BBB and the AAAA are solely intended to prevent more active government regulation, and that in fact these organizations are pretty toothless and don't really do that much to stop abuses by particular advertisers. So again, a question about whether or not self-regulation by these organizations really is meaningful and works. Now, as for U.S. government action and agencies like the Federal Trade Commission, this is, I think, a more open question about how effective the FTC has been in terms of monitoring and regulating the practices of advertisers. We see that in certain historical periods, the FTC has indeed been more active and engaged, calling to task particular advertisers that have been making false claims or, trying to manipulate children in very unethical ways, and so forth. All right, but in other historical eras, the FTC has been pretty hands-off and lax about regulation. And that, I think, reflects changing government views about the appropriate role of government. I think what you see is a pattern here, that whenever you have a more conservative, Republican, more pro-free market political party in power, all right, in those historical moments, the FTC takes a more hands-off approach. It doesn't really get actively involved in regulating advertisers or their practices. In other historical moments, when you have had more active activist liberal Democrats in power, the FTC has taken a more engaged role in monitoring and regulating advertisers. So I think it's important to look at what do organizations and agencies like the FTC actually do, and how powerful is their oversight of advertising.